interesting venue. I've talked a lot about bridges, and I've taught a lot of Bible classes over many years, but I've never combined these two, so this should be kind of an interesting situation. When I came to New Mexico a long time ago, I showed up at New Mexico State University as a brand new PhD, and you know, we're unemployed in the summertime, and so they sent me up to the New Mexico Department of Transportation to work in the bridge section. And those guys looked at me like, I don't know what we're going to do with you. And so, you know, we're always looking for a niche that we can work in. Too far away. All right, you have to move a little closer there. All right. About a couple of years before I came to New Mexico, we had a Silver Bridge collapse in Ohio. 68 people, 56 people were killed in the collapse of that structure. It got a great deal of interest around the country. You remember when the I-35 bridge up in Minneapolis collapsed a few years ago, that gained a lot of national attention. Well, you can multiply that by about 10 and get the idea of what happened when this bridge went down. And so they passed a new law that every state would now have to inspect and evaluate all of the bridges within their state. So they didn't know what to do with me, and they didn't know what to do about this new bridge inspection program. And so they said, why don't you go over in the corner and figure out how to do the evaluation of bridges for us. And so I did. And while I was there, I also found out that they were having a lot of difficulty training their bridge inspectors. And so as I started to go back in the fall to teach, I said, you know, we're professors. I think we could teach bridge inspection to your guys. And they were more than happy to get rid of that problem. And so they started sending their people down to New Mexico State in January, in the middle of the winter. So people couldn't do a lot of work outside, and so we started teaching that course. And we didn't have a lot of materials at that point in time, and so the next summer, John Miner, who was one of my colleagues, and I started driving around the state to work with the crews out in the field, and we took a lot of pictures, and we got a lot of interaction with the people in the field. And so the next year, our course was greatly improved. And so it started getting attention because other people, like people down in Texas, started saying, can we send some of our people up there? And then the DOT guys were kind of sneaky. They said, you know, we think you ought to get a little more experience inspecting the bridge. Would you go inspect this bridge for us? Oh, sure, we'll do that. That would be a great experience. And what we forgot to do, this by the way is the inspection equipment. This piece of equipment here allows you to, it's called a snooper truck. It has hydraulic equipment that allows you to go over and underneath so you can see what's going on in the bridge. Now, one of the things we forgot to ask is, which bridge do you want us to inspect? And sometimes that's important. The bridge they wanted us to inspect is the Rio Grande Gorge Bridge, which was the biggest bridge in the state. And from an inspector's point of view, it's 650 feet above the Rio Grande, second highest highway bridge in the United States at the time. And so we had to figure out how to do that. And it took us all summer to do that. And they became real happy with us because the consultants bid to do that inspection was over $100,000. And they hired us 2 professors back in those days for like $10,000. All right, and so that was a pretty good savings for them, and we did get a lot of great experience. There's the modified snooper. We put the frame on the end of it because we couldn't reach the bottom of this bridge, and there was a bosun's chair that ran down on a cable that went down to the lower part of this bridge. And in this particular case, when I was much younger there, checking the tightness of the bolts with an air hammer. I particularly had a great experience. I had an experience right out in the middle, 600 feet above the river. I was down the bottom porch, and I heard this airplane go by. I looked up and I didn't see an airplane, and I looked down. And this idiot had flown under the bridge with his cable hanging down that I was on. So that kind of got our blood flowing a little bit there. And so as I said, there were a lot of people trying to figure out how to do bridge inspection. And so these other agencies, Texas, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Nevada Department of Transportation, the Forest Service, and others started sending their people down to New Mexico State to attend our training courses. And so we were starting to get quite a bit of good recognition from that point of view. They also started having us do all of the larger complex bridges within the state. This is the big arch bridge at Los Alamos. We get to do that bridge every year now because it had some load concerns about it, about the deck, so we do that every summer. We would also do down south of here is Nogales Canyons. Most of you probably just drive by there, but if you look underneath, there's some really nice truss bridge there that we do the inspections on, Canadian River, and several other particular structures around the state that the DOT asked us to do the inspection on because we had a great deal more experience in doing that. And then, so we had gained enough experience that we convinced the Federal Highway Administration through the National Highway Institute that we should be the contractor to teach the course nationwide. Unfortunately, we were able to get that contract, and so over the next 5 or 6 years, we taught bridge inspection in more than 30 different states around the country. So anywhere from southern New Mexico to Minnesota, Boston to Hawaii. That was doing the one in Hawaii was really terrible. Having to go out there and do that. I think Amanda got to go on that trip. By this point in time, we also developed a lot of insight into what the database looked like. And so one of the problems the state had was large trucks that came into the state would want a permit to drive down some road system. Maybe they were coming from Las Cruces, coming up to US 60 and going over to Clovis. All right. And so the DOT wanted to know, well, can they cross all the bridges along that route? And so they asked us to develop some software, and we did that in terms of the overload program. And so they implemented that in the late 70s, and 30-something years later, they're still using that software. We also met some people from the University of Maryland, and John Miner and myself and those guys published the first textbook on bridge inspection. It was a great bestseller. When I got the royalties every year, my wife and I would go out to eat if we ate off the dollar menu. You know? It wasn't a great financial success, but at least we got some opportunities there. And we began teaching a comprehensive bridge inspection course that we still teach at New Mexico State in January and in May. And we've had people from all over the country. Utah comes on, Utah, Nevada, Nebraska, Louisiana, the Forest Service, really interesting groups, the National Transportation Safety Board. They send their people down to our course. Now these are the people, when you have an accident or a bridge fails or an airplane crashes, those are the people investigating those situations. So when they came to our class to ask us what to look for, it became we had a lot of fun doing a lot of the interactions with those guys. We've had people from the Corps of Engineers, we've had engineers and consultants from Canada, Mexico, Central America, China, and Korea come to our course. So we've had a lot of interaction with people around the world. In 1989, we started a co-op bridge inspection program in which we would hire 4 students every 6 months to work with our engineers to inspect bridges for the state of New Mexico under a contract. And that program is still going on. So when we go to inspect the Gorge Bridge today, we still have some people that, students that get to go get a little thrill. You never made it up to the Gorge Bridge, did you, Wes? Wes is one of my former students.
I got to do the Canadian Bridge.
Okay. Amanda went through it. Amanda went through it also. And so that's a great program that we get people that get a lot of good experience that go out into industry nowadays. We had a unique opportunity when they decided to replace the I-40 bridge over the Rio Grande in Albuquerque. We somehow convinced them that they ought to let us do some testing on that bridge. And we got the support from the DOT, Senator Domenici, David Albright back here, and others that helped us put together a team. We had New Mexico State as the lead. We had Los Alamos National Lab. We had Sandia National Lab, Texas A&M, and University of New Mexico all participating in this that became a landmark structural health monitoring test, because what we were trying to do is figure out which technology could identify a defect, and we were artificially making defects there to see which technology would be the best to pick that up. And so we got a lot of publicity out of that. In fact, so much publicity that the city of Seoul, South Korea, invited us to come over and test a couple of their subway bridges because they had a highway bridge just upstream from this one that had collapsed on, and they heard that we had this new technology, so they invited us over and we tested this bridge. 1.5 million people per day ride the subways over this bridge when we were there, and so that was a good reason. You don't want the subway to crash with that many people going over it. And what we found, it did have some problems. It had some fatigue cracks that became a significant concern, and when we told them what the possible consequences were, they decided to replace that structure. And for almost a year, the people had to get off on one side of the river, catch a bus across the highway bridge, and get back on the subway on the other side. So it was a major inconvenience, but they just didn't want to take the chance that it would collapse, and it was a serious problem. Most time we're looking for damage or deterioration. Fortunately, not very often do we have this kind of damage, because it's fairly clear, I think, to even the untrained that you want to close this bridge, right? But this is the sort of problem that occurs particularly with these hydraulic type equipment. If they don't chain these down, these hydraulic arms on these systems, as it bounces around the road, that arm gradually goes up and up and up, and then they have this great embarrassment of, oops, I just hit the bridge. And so those are the, we can't do much about that, but most other kinds of problems we can do a pretty good job of predicting and making sure it doesn't occur. I'm still doing it. 3 weeks ago, I'm in the middle there, they let me drive this is the new snooper truck. I have now more than 40 years of experience driving that machine, and so we were doing the Rio Grande Gorge Bridge again. This machine makes it a lot easier because it is so large and capable that it can go down under the bridge, go all the way over on the other side and come up on the far side. So you can do the whole thing going down the structure in one direction. And so I've had a lot of fun being a bridge inspector. A lot of people think, engineers just sit in the office and look at computer screens. But obviously I've had a lot of other opportunities to do different things there. Now, when Reuben called me and asked me if I would be willing to come up and talk to you about how I use my bridge work and maintain a Christian life, I thought, well, that sounds like we need a bridge between those two, right? And indeed you do need a bridge. And as I got to thinking about it, the bridge that you need is the Holy Bible. That's the bridge that you need. It doesn't matter whether you're a civil engineer or you're a physicist or you're a geologist. Any profession that you want to choose, if you want to be a Christian, then that's the bridge that you have to use to make that transition. And the nice thing about this bridge, it doesn't have any defects. It's been inspected and approved by God. All right? And so we know if we want to do what's pleasing in His sight, then that's the way that you do that. Now, the way I thought I would approach this is, I think when I was in college, that I had a lot of the same opinions and attitudes that many of the students have today. I considered my relationship to God with God as a private relationship, I felt like I was in control, If I had the right attitude, that is, if I wanted to be pleasing to God, then God would accept my worship and my work because I had the right attitude. And God and I, and when you think about, when you make a statement like that, you're bringing God down to your level. And I thought, that if you came to a situation, we could do some compromise and some negotiation was available to me in my relationship to God. And I was happily going along with that sort of an attitude, feeling like I was doing great. Then I met a young lady in college that, I wanted to impress. And when we started talking about our relationship to God, and I kind of explained what my attitude was, she was kind of scratching her head and said, maybe we ought to study the Bible together and see if that's true. And I felt very confident. I said, oh sure, I'll be happy to do that, because I thought, I was comfortable in my, and of course as a student, I was in graduate school at that time, if you have a belief, then you should be willing to validate that belief, right? And so I felt very comfortable in doing that, but I don't, as I look back on it, I don't know why I felt that way. Because if you'd asked me to go find a scripture in Galatians, the 2nd chapter, I wouldn't have known whether to go to the Old Testament or the New Testament. I was pretty ignorant of the scriptures. And so I made the agreement to pursue that with her. And of course, I found some things that were a bit dismaying to me. For instance, you look in Jeremiah or in Proverbs, it says, "There is a way that seems right to man, but its end is the way of death." And if you remember the previous slide, what was I doing? I felt like I was doing the right thing without any consideration of what God had to say. Do you, as a man wise in his own eyes? There is more hope for a fool than for him. Proverbs 26:12. And then perhaps the real sticker in all of this was from Jesus' own lips. In Matthew the 7th chapter, in verse 21, it says, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say unto me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name cast out demons, and in your name perform many miracles? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness." That pretty well pulled the rug out from under my feet at that point in time. But clearly, I wasn't doing God's will. I was doing my will. I was doing what I thought was right. And so I had to start looking and studying the Bible more carefully. The conclusion that I came to and thought about it from a mathematical point of view, a lot of math theorems, I don't know if they still do this or not, but they would say this is necessary but not sufficient. Well, belief in God is necessary, but it's not sufficient if you don't know His Word. And so, as I began to study then, I came to verses such as 1 Corinthians, the 2nd chapter there, and verses 10 and 11. "For to us God revealed them through His Spirit. For the Spirit searches all things, even the depths of God. For who among men knows the thoughts of a man except the spirit of a man, which is in him? Even so the thoughts of God no one knows except the Spirit of God." And the analogy that I made from that is, do you know what I'm thinking? No, you don't know what I'm thinking, right? So, if you're sitting there looking and you're saying, well, I know what God's thinking, you're really in trouble, aren't you? You're really in trouble unless He tells you, then you don't know. And the way He's going to tell you then is through the Scriptures. And one great scripture that brings that to our mind is in 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17, that it says, "All Scripture is inspired by God and profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, for training in righteousness, that the man of God might be adequate, equipped for every good work." So if you're going to be equipped for every good work, if you're going to do what God has wanted you to do, where are you going to have to go? You've got to go to the Scriptures, don't you? This is not just something that automatically comes to you. And so, this was a great shock to me, and I've been stimulated to be studying Scriptures ever since. And one of the Scriptures that keeps coming to my mind along this line is Isaiah the 55th chapter in verses 8 and 9. It says, "My thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways, says the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so that my way is higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." And I keep trying to come up with some physical representation of that. And the best thing I've come up with is the Milky Way that God's created. And you look at that Milky Way, and they say that dot right there is the sun. And where is the earth? Well, it's a little bitty dot in that system, isn't it? And what are we on that planet? We're so insignificant. And so when you're comparing yourself to God, to me, that's kind of a visual representation that we have to recognize that God's ways are much higher than ours. And if we want to do His will, then we have to go study His Word. And I ask myself then, was my attitude unique in this? I don't think so. I think way too many people fall into that trap. And as I've been studying recently, I was asked to do some lectures on how to teach college students the Bible. And so when I was asked to do that, I got to thinking about a learned society and how difficult it is to teach a learned society about God. And the examples I give to you is, think about what Paul encountered when he was in Athens. When Paul was in Athens, in the 17th chapter, we get a little idea of what was going on in that interaction with that. And in those days, we know that Greece was a learned society, weren't they? And beginning in verse 16 of Acts, the 17th chapter, it says, "But while Paul was waiting for them," that is, was for Timothy and Silas, while he was waiting for them at Athens, his spirit was provoked within him as he was beholding the city full of idols. And as he was reasoning in the synagogue with Jews and God-fearing Gentiles, and the marketplace every day with those who happened to be present. And also there were Epicurean and Stoic philosophers who were conversing with him. Some were saying, "What would this babbler wish to say?" And others said, "He seemed to be proclaiming some strange deity, because he was preaching Jesus in the resurrection." And as they took him and brought him to the Areopagus, saying, "May we know more about this teaching that you are proclaiming." And he went on and preached Jesus Christ to them through their own idols. And they seemed to be listening until you get down to verse 32. "Now when they heard about the resurrection of the dead, some of them began to sneer, and others said, 'We will hear of this again.' And so what did most of them do? They simply got up and left. A few, if you go ahead and read the next, stayed and listened to Paul about Jesus Christ. But most of them got up and left, because they didn't believe this babbler as they described him. And as he traveled in 60 or 70 miles on west to Corinth, we find that he encountered some similar problems there. Corinth was a learned society too, right? Even the church there was a learned society, but the church there had generated a few problems of their own. If you remember in the Corinthian letter that in the 1 Corinthians, the 5th chapter, we learn about the young man that had his father's wife. The church was simply ignoring that. And then if you go over to the 11th chapter, you find that they were improperly partaking of the Lord's Supper. As I read that over, to me, in today's vernacular, they were having a tailgate party instead of taking of the Lord's Supper in a reverent manner. And back in the 1st chapter, in verses 12 and 13, Paul reprimands them because they had started dividing up into sects. Some saying, I'm of Paul, and I'm of Cephas, and I'm of Apollos. And so they had divided the congregation up into different groups of people. And Paul says, has Christ been divided? He gave them a great reprimand. And so that kind of sets up the thing that really strikes me, the verses that from this particular topic that I feel are so important. If you look in that first chapter down in beginning in verse 18, Paul begins to preach at this learned society. He says, for the word of the cross is to those who are perishing foolishness, but to those who are being saved is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the cleverness of the clever I will set aside. Where is the wise man? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has God not made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world through its own wisdom did not come to know God, but God is pleased through the foolishness of the message preached to save those who believe. So that was the difficulty that Paul was encountering as he encountered this learned society at Corinth. And he challenges them. Where is your wise man? Where is your scribe? And where is your debater? Are they believing in God? And the answer was no. They considered that to be foolishness. Considered it to be foolishness. And so we see that perhaps as a result of this, the Greeks didn't hold Paul in a great deal of respect. Or in the 2 Corinthians, the 10th chapter, in verse 10, it says, for his letters, they say, are weighty and powerful, but his bodily presence is weak, and his speech is contemptible. Can you fathom someone describing the Apostle Paul in that manner? His bodily presence is weak. He wasn't a great, big, powerful, handsome man. And his speech was contemptible in their sight. And so I think you get an idea there. And that's the introduction then into Apollos. Because I don't know whether this was God's plan particularly or not. Well, it was God's plan because it happened and it's recorded in the scriptures, right? But Apollos came along, and as you read about Apollos, you find he's all the things that Paul wasn't. And chapter 18, beginning in verse 24, describes Apollos. Now a certain Jew named Apollos, an Alexandrian by birth, an eloquent man, came to Ephesus, and he was mighty in the scriptures. And this man had been instructed in the way of the Lord, being fervent in spirit. He was speaking and teaching accurately the things concerning Jesus, being acquainted only with the baptism of John. And he began to speak boldly in the synagogue. But when Priscilla and Aquila heard him, they took him aside and explained to him the way of God more accurately. And when he wanted to go over to Achaia, that is Greece today, the brethren encouraged him and wrote to the disciples to welcome him. And when he arrived there, he helped greatly those who believed through grace, for he was powerfully refuting the Jews in public, demonstrating by the Scriptures that Jesus was the Christ. So if you look at the attributes, by the way, if you ever want to look for a preacher, see how he stacks up against this one. I was teaching a lesson on this, and I put this up on the board, and our preacher was gone. And when he came in, his eyes got real big, you know. We thought maybe we were searching for him. But Alexandria at the time now was the second largest city in the world. And it was a very religious city. The first version of the Bible was attributed to Alexandria. So we know that Apollos came from an educated society. It says he was an eloquent man. And you contrast that to Paul, then you can see why the Greeks would be taken with this man, because they held that in such high esteem. But he was also mighty in the Scriptures. Mighty in the Scriptures. And even though he only understood the baptism of John, he readily accepted the correction by Priscilla and Aquila. And so you can see he wasn't an arrogant person. He was a humble man that was willing to accept correction. And then when he got to Greece, he was so successful because he was a humble man. He spoke boldly, and he told the truth and convinced people by the Scriptures that Jesus was the Christ. And so, as we take a look at that situation, then I think that we find that Apollos was such a great individual that had such a great impact, and you can see why people might start becoming his disciples until they are told the truth. Now, as I started thinking about this, then I tried to draw some analogies today. What are some of the problems that we have in teaching the educated, the learned societies today? Well, if you think about it, if you go to a university, what is their teaching process? Well, they teach the students that in methods almost totally opposite to the Bible. Students are taught to seek information from a broad background, to question the accuracy and the validity of the information. They are taught to seek out teachers and authors with the best credentials, that is, have a PhD, and hopefully from a prestigious institution. Engineering, that would be MIT or Caltech, or here locally maybe Texas A&M or NMSU or Tech here in Socorro. Right? So that's what university students are taught to seek out. What kind of mentors should you have? Well, mentors and advisors that have significant external funding. They have many publications in the field in recognized journals. That's the way we want our university students to proceed in their education, right? What is the body of knowledge of the Bible? It's a single book with numerous contributing authors written more than 2,000 years ago. What are the credentials of the authors? Shepherds, farmers, fishermen. No academic credentials at all, right? The Bible is not a result of a carefully documented, laboratory-proved document at all, is it? The Bible is from a single, infallible source that doesn't argue or reason or rationalize or debate with you. The Bible presents tremendous events that boggle the mind in a very calm, concise manner. The creation, one chapter. You find Noah and the flood. You find Abraham, Moses, and the Israelites from Egypt. You find David and Goliath and Samson, the birth and life of Christ, his death, burial, and resurrection. All in a very concise manner that it seems simply gives you the facts. Doesn't debate with you, doesn't try to argue with you, it just gives you the facts. And compared to technology turnover today, many people say, well, how can the Bible still be valid? But they keep forgetting who the author of the Bible is. God. God, the author of that Bible. He inspired it. So it doesn't have to be brand new work. One of my favorite verses in Romans 16 and 17 says, "For it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes." That's the way you please God. That's the way, this is the source. And that's the way you have to approach it. I appreciate your attention. Thank you very much for coming. I'd be happy to.
Questions?
Whatever your procedure is, you have
yes,
questions or
any questions?
comments, we'd be happy to entertain those.
Do you give free rides on that cherry picker to some of these people?
Well, we tried to give you one and you wouldn't take
I
it.
was too smart. I knew who was running it.
But we do. We give rides to all. This summer, a month ago, we took all of our students up, and all of them that wanted to go over the side, we gave them a ride. And all
The governor's been wanting to jump out of balloons and stuff. You better get her that.
Yeah. Well, one of the previous governors asked me if I would design a what are those straps? Those bungee cord. Asked me if I'd design a bungee cord platform for people to jump off the bridge, and I went, no. If they're crazy enough to do that, you know.
Was that Gary?
Yeah, it was Gary.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was a little on the outside. Yeah.
When you were a young man in college, did you ever have any vision, any dream that you would be this renowned person you are now? Did you ever have any inkling?
Well, I'm not sure I fit that category, but oh no, I grew up on a cotton farm, and the reason I went to school is because my dad kept saying, if you don't want to keep doing this every day, go get an education. And then when I just kept going to school, he kept, son, are you ever going to quit going to school? But, no, I seemed like I just kind of walked into the right places at the right time. But it's been a great career. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
We have refreshments for everybody. Oh, your daughter's got a question.
Who was that young lady that challenged you when you were in college?
That was my wife. She's been my wife for 47 years. She's still challenging me. You know, brings me back to her. Thank you very much. You have refreshments, you say?
Yeah, there's refreshments back there. Thanks to Betty.